We often hear about ADHD as a childhood diagnosis for boys. But what happens when women discover that they have ADHD in adulthood? If you think ADHD only means being a little distracted, it's time to broaden your perspective. In this episode, Trina Haynes joins me to reveal how ADHD uniquely impacts adult women, from managing family responsibilities to finding success in the workplace. We'll discover why late diagnosis is so much more common than you think and explore the hidden struggles impacting women's life living with ADHD. Hi, I'm Dr. Theresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Think Differently. Today, we are going to dive into the often hidden world of ADHD in women and how it shapes everything from our home life to workplace success. Joining us is Trina Haynes, known to many from her podcast, MyADHDLady, and she's built an incredible platform that advocates for women who are often diagnosed later in life, but she advocates for all of us. Trina's work brings so much needed awareness to the unique challenges women face in balancing their family life, careers, societal expectations, while all trying to manage ADHD. So excited to have Trina today so we can all better understand and support and empower women living with ADHD. So Trina, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about this. It's really important. So it'll be a good conversation.
I'm excited about it. And we've been trying to get together. So I'm excited, been really waiting for
We've
this
had a
conversation.
lot of back and forth. We had this. Yeah, I feel like even the way that this was scheduled was kind of ADHD. So we're here. We did it.
We're here. We made it. No more procrastination. So how about we start with you just sharing a little bit about yourself and what led you to start MyADHDLady?
Yeah, that'd be a good place to start. So I was diagnosed with ADHD in my 30s. So just a couple years ago, I guess it was probably 3 or 4 years ago at this point. It's not been that long. And when I was diagnosed, I really, truly did not know that women could have ADHD. I did not believe my diagnosis. I had only known little boys with ADHD. It was just so foreign to me that women could have ADHD. And so I kind of went online and tried to find other women with ADHD. I wanted to connect with someone else. Okay, well, if I'm dealing with this, what is this? And I need to see what this looks like in other women. I went online and there weren't that many women talking about ADHD at the time. So there was just a handful. There was Jessica McCabe from How to ADHD. She was one of the first with a big platform talking about ADHD. And I ran into a bunch of her videos. But really, I just started kind of posting about my experiences with ADHD as a woman. And quickly learned that there are lots of women with ADHD. And I always joke that I set out to find one and I found 200,000 pretty quickly. So so that's kind of how MyADHD was born. It wasn't, it was just supposed to be a community to find other people like me. So selfishly, I've gotten a lot out of the platform, but I've also connected with so many incredible women who are struggling with this. So it's been really an interesting journey.
And so when we think about the journey, you mentioned something and you're like, when I thought of ADHD, I thought of hyperactivity in boys, right? And we think going back in school and drugs like Ritalin, and you were diagnosed in 30. What even brought you to that realization that
Yeah. Okay. So I should probably have started there. Yeah, it was kind of a combination of, I always felt like I was struggling more than everyone, but I could never put my finger on it. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew always that I was very different, struggled much more. And I was maybe more hyper. I was more outgoing and bubbly than most people were, but I never knew what it was. And then when I was in my 30s, this was kind of right after COVID, I had always struggled in my career. So every job I've had, I've really had a hard time. I've had a lot of jobs. But I always kept thinking that like I was waiting for one particular job and then everything would fall into place. So I had just kept trying to find that one particular job. So I ended up a couple of years ago, I found that job. It checked all the boxes. It was the right pay. It was the right everything and great benefits and all of that. And I was super excited. But then after a few months, I was still struggling. I was still having a really hard time. I could not figure out why I was suffering, to be honest with you. And so I started going to therapy to try to work through what was going on. And I got super lucky because my therapist had ADHD. So she recognized it in me right away and kind of pushed me towards that process. But I still, all the way through that process, did not believe that women had ADHD. So it was a little bit of a roller coaster for me to get diagnosed with ADHD. I just didn't understand it at all. So that's kind of why I fell down the rabbit hole and just like learning everything I could about my brain and what this looks like. And started an Instagram, a newsletter, a podcast. I like just could not shut up about ADHD with women. So I'm still talking about it. Funny how it happened.
And that is one of the things, that hyper focus and just getting really uber excited on the topic of the day. So that's one of the things I want to bring people along on, because I don't think people understand ADD or ADHD very well, even amongst the boys set. And then in women, it appears a little bit differently.
So different.
Can you give the audience a little sense of,
yes,
you might be ADHD if...
Yeah, I can do a little bit of that. So I do want to preface it that I'm not a diagnostic clinician. I just want to, do your research. This is what I have seen. I do have a huge audience of, 200,000-ish women that I, converse with all the time. And I learned so much from just like mass sharing of experiences. And so what I see in women often that is very kind of different between men or boys, girls versus boys, is women tend to have much lower self-esteem. They struggle with chronic stress in a way that men may not, shame and anxiety. So a lot of it is like the internal mental struggle, the shame from, hearing so many negative messages in your youth as someone with ADHD. So it just shows up differently. And then for me, I was not running around the classroom being loud or disruptive. I was lost in my brain and just in my own world, and just would completely tune out an entire lecture in school. Like I just couldn't comprehend, couldn't pay attention, could not focus on that because my own inner dialogue was so intense. So I think that's really common. I think maybe the girls were daydreaming in class, and so they got missed. They weren't causing a problem in the classroom. And that's still happening. That's still really common in girls. So the differences are there, but they're very, very different, and they haven't been studied near as much as in men and boys.
It is an interesting thing. And so as I always tell folks that as we come out of childhood and we come into adulthood, the problems are there, but they change just with maturity and other things. So sometimes people are like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, well, there's like this inner dialogue. And you were talking about the stress and anxiety. A lot of women, before they get the ADHD diagnosis, they think that everybody stresses out about the minute details and kind of the snowball effect. That's what I always call it, or the butterfly effect, where one thing happens and their brain's going 800 miles a minute. Or, and we see this in the odd ADHD population, where they like go through scripts almost about like how should I dress and how should I walk? And, some people call that a form of masking, but ADHD folks do that too, because we want to fit in because we don't want to be ridiculed. And how do we know that that's the right way to go? And so there's all these scenarios and routines that are just running through the head. And what I think women don't appreciate, especially undiagnosed women, is until you share that you do that with somebody, you don't realize that not everybody does that.
Yes. That is where I came from when I started my Lady ADHD. I did not realize that other people were doing this and going through this. So I personally went through that experience of just finding people to resonate with in a way that I just haven't before. And how impactful and deep that has been really impactful my whole life, to just be surrounded by so many people experiencing the same struggles as me. Has been amazing. So yeah, that also happens. And then like you were saying too, a lot of women will, when they go to get diagnosed, they end up with, this could be depression, this could be anxiety, this could be so many things, because we're just used to struggling, and it's hard to ask for help in the right way sometimes. And the clinicians aren't always getting it right. It's tricky. So the fact that I went to a therapist who had ADHD, and then I got diagnosed as a woman with ADHD pretty fairly easily, quote unquote, is very unique. A lot of women, when they go to get diagnosed, are hit with a lot of hurdles just in the diagnosis process. So it's very frustrating to see.
And so when you think about it, you get the diagnosis. Do you feel like it's something you share, or do you feel like it just helps inform your perspective on how you see yourself in relation to the rest?
Well, it's so funny. I think this varies definitely from person to person. I think me personally, I got my diagnosis and I told hundreds of thousands of people on the internet that I got diagnosed with ADHD. I was very open about it. It was a light bulb moment that I wanted to share with other people who might also need that light bulb moment. But I do know that not everybody screams it from the rooftops in such a way. And some people are really afraid to talk about ADHD. It's not met with the greatest, empathy. And there's a lot of stigma involved still. And it's really challenging to navigate talking about it. Even for me, still, it's challenging to talk about it.
And I'm grateful you are. I sometimes like to think about, we are women, and while everybody, and I think caretakers are changing, right? I think men do a lot more than they used to, but there still is a little bit of a divide in terms of the tasks that women and men tend to take on, or that our families or friends assume we take on, right? So
fair enough.
Because, I could think of my husband going, I do those things. So we know there are great husbands out there that do a lot of the tasks and running with the kids. But people tend to be like, what are you doing for your kid's birthday? What's your plan for dinner on Friday? I don't think that far ahead. But there are these things where it's like that day-to-day family life where ADHD can really get heightened. I've known people with ADHD that are really organized when they want to be. If they're planning a vacation, they probably have a schedule of every day that's going to happen. But if you say what's happening on Saturday, they'll be like, well, what do you mean what's happening on Saturday? So there's these gaps. How do you see, what have you heard with not just yourself, but the people you talk to? How do they see ADHD impacting just the day-to-day stuff that can compound when you start thinking about the work stuff we'll get to?
Oh, it's so hard. I mean, like I said, women are really having a hard time. This has been really a struggle for women a lot of women are finding out now in the last few years that they have ADHD, that they have a name for why they've been struggling. But yeah, managing the calendar for the family, being organized, forgetfulness. This is all stuff that I deal with personally. I have 3 teenage daughters. We have a very busy household, and I have to have a lot of things in place to help me stay on track. I cannot rely on my brain to remember things. I have to have so many things, helping me. And there are women out there that don't know they have ADHD, that don't have those resources. They don't know that those resources will help them. So they are really struggling. So I feel for the women who have ADHD and don't know that they have it yet, and how much shame is involved in that. And managing family life is it's chaos. That's the only word I can think of is chaos. And I feel like it's like that for a lot of moms. Like that's probably a normal thing to say for most moms, but it's, I think women with ADHD are carrying around a 10-pound, 20-pound backpack that you don't see, right? So there's a lot going on behind the scenes for someone who has ADHD, like you said earlier, trying to mask, trying to fit in, trying to keep up with everything and not look like it's falling apart is very heavy.
Yeah. Some of the things I point out to folks is like the friend that's always asking, what should we wear? What are you bringing? They might have ADHD. The person that my mom used to call it fashionably late, or they're always 5 minutes late to everything, they might have ADHD because it's not necessarily time blindness at that point, but not great at estimating. Like if I have 5 minutes, it probably is going to take 7 minutes. So you're going to be like 2 minutes late. Like
I'll tell you, if you think it's 5, it's probably 15. Just from experience, I have to like double and triple my estimates. I'm always wrong with time.
And you were talking about jobs, and I just remember it didn't matter what time I left. When I had to drive to the office in my early days, I don't think I was ever on time. And the only thing I think I ever got written up for was just never on time. I wasn't on time for class. I wasn't on time for work. I was worried about not being on time for this meeting. Like there's just all these things where it's like, oh, I've got 2 minutes. I can write that email. And then 10 minutes is gone.
It's super interesting though with time, because what I do see is people with ADHD generally, and I have to say generally, are either late, significantly late, or way early because they are trying to overcompensate and they're really struggling and stressing about when things start and end. Like this, it's very stressful for people with ADHD because they don't want to be late. They don't want to be yelled at. They don't want to be ridiculed. So sometimes we also show up extremely early and we sit there with anxiety.
Right. With like the interviews, like when you have that person for the interview and they show up 30 minutes late early, could be a punctual person or it could just be somebody with ADHD that is really horrified that they're not going to.
Yeah. Rarely is it like right on time. I would say that that's questionable.
We'll get there. And so I think there's a lot of stresses. How do you think that affects the family dynamics? Because obviously kids need structure and order. Partners depend on each other. How do you see that impacting dynamics sometimes?
It's tough. I feel like it depends on how much support the person with ADHD has at home, if they have, a therapist or coach outside of the home. It really truly depends. I think there's so much, there's so many beautiful things about ADHD that you can bring to a family. I know a lot of people with ADHD are super creative and incredibly loving, and their kids just adore them, for the most part. Like they're funny and silly. And this is what I see in the strengths of people with ADHD, that they bring a lot to the family, a whole lot. And the things that they struggle with fully depend on the support that they have. I think you need support. If you have ADHD, it's helpful to have, to talk about your struggles at home. And if that's a safe environment, I mean, there's so many factors, but it has to affect family life in one way or the other. But I try really hard to just focus on the good parts that it brings to the family, because there's so many good things.
And I think I just think technology is such a help, although I can find it can also be cumbersome because you can have your virtual calendar, but our family also has a paper calendar on the fridge.
Oh, so many calendars.
And sticky notes of the important things you have to do tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much you're focusing on this, right? If you really want to have a bunch of things on your calendar or if you do have a lot of things on your calendar, and you're struggling, there's a system that maybe needs to be in place. And the families or the ADHDers that maybe don't have that any systems in place, I would think that they were really having a hard time because I have systems in place and I'm still really having a hard time. So I can only imagine if you don't have the right support systems or the tools in place to help you at home, because it's just a lot. It's a lot to manage. And the way that technology is nowadays, it's great and it's helpful, but it's still a lot.
Especially when it's coming from different all over. Which leads us to work, because like you have your family life and you're trying to manage that and you're moving that, or your personal life, your social life, whatever activities you want to do. And then it's like, oh, I have to pay bills. So now I have to have work. And you talked about the revolving door in the workplace. What are the challenges you're seeing for women with ADHD more than what you're hearing with men? Because I mean, we all have issues. Is it similar or is it different?
Oh, that's tough. So at work, I think overall people are afraid to talk about ADHD at work. They're afraid to ask for accommodations. They don't know what accommodations look like. There's a lot of questions about, do I bring this up at work or not? I think for women, that's another layer on top of some other things they're probably already factored in that makes work tough. I can think of like, okay, now you're a mom who, you have a kid and you sometimes have to miss work for that, and then adding in the layer of having ADHD and asking for accommodations. Like, you may not, ask for accommodations. It's rough. So I can't think of any differences in particular for women with ADHD at work, except that everyone doesn't want to talk about it at work. I think that's very common. There's still just so much stigma around it. And it's really challenging and sad, to be honest with you. But I do see, even since I started talking about ADHD just a few years ago, I do see progress. I see companies taking big steps forward here. So I'm hopeful, but there's still a lot of stigma that are making people kind of afraid to ask for help at work.
Yeah. And it's not the hyperactivity component that everybody thinks of when they think of kids. It's that attention component, because it's like, well, if you can't pay attention, if you can't sustain attention, which is kind of, there's an irony there, because people with ADHD actually have excellent memories. Sometimes the chatty Cathy in the office is ADHD and they can recall like every date from a soap opera. Like they like have these catalogs of things that they have just like mastered.
Oh yeah. I have a good memory for people usually. Like I can usually name everyone who works in the office. I can name who their kids are, what their dogs' names are, where their kids go to school, those types of things. I really just enjoy talking to people. So I usually gather all of that information and then everything else goes out the window. But it works for me because I'm in a really social career, right? So like this is how my brain works. So it took me a couple years to figure this out, that like I need to be in very people-centered companies. So that's why I do the work I do, because that's one of my strengths as someone with ADHD. So I don't know if we can skip to that or not, but I just love talking about the strengths of people with ADHD and how that plays into work. And I think for me personally, I've had, and this is going to be super embarrassing, but I'm going to say it, but I've had probably 30 something jobs, and I'm 38. So I haven't really been working in the workforce for that long. I guess that's an average of like 2 jobs a year. It's been really, really hard. I've had a very hard time in my career. And only recently I've gotten to a really good place because I took an intense and scrutinized what my strengths are and spent a lot of time scrutinizing just looking deeply at what my strengths are. And then kind of shaping a job to that, right? So if you're able to do that, I know that that's not reasonable for everyone, but really, really looking at what your strengths are, because we are, as ADHDers, we are super aware of our weaknesses. Like we know our weaknesses really, 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 really well because we're reminded of them often. We've grown up our whole lives hearing about the things that we're not doing well, that we're struggling with. but we very rarely look at our strengths. And I think that plays so much into career for us. And it needs to be something that you just study really hard, like what your strengths are. And we need to stop looking at everything as a weakness. It's just not good for you.
It's not. And in the wrong environment, strengths of ADHDers are sometimes also teased, right? So
Yeah.
somebody like you, really good at public speaking. If you're in the wrong role, you'll be told you talk too much.
Oh, that happened everywhere. I actually, when I was a teenager, I worked at the deli, and my mom ran a grocery store, and I worked in the deli, and they told me that I was being too nice to the customers, and I need to stand there and scoop potato salad. So, that's not, you don't want to hear that, but at the same time, like, I was just being nice. But yeah, I didn't know my strength was that I should be talking and for a living. I write and I talk. I like talking. I like hearing myself talk, apparently. So why not build my career around that strength instead of being told that it's a weakness?
Right.
Like, of course it is a weakness if I was sitting in a cubicle surrounded by people who are studying. That's not a wise spot, right? So, I've learned a lot of lessons having so many jobs. And one of them is just, scrutinizing the heck out of your strengths and just owning them.
Yeah. And I think people need to really do that some of the feedback you've had is you're not good at that. And you might not be, like, probably not. Some of us may not be the best project managers or task managers or whatever type of things. There's just certain things you don't want to do. That makes sense. But what I always tell folks is look for the things that the feedback you've received throughout your life that you were energized doing until somebody told you not to do it. So you probably enjoyed talking to the customers, you were having a great time, and then somebody told you you had a problem and it didn't resonate and that made you feel bad because if somebody said, "Oh, Theresa, you're not good at chopping onions," I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm not good at chopping onions." And you wouldn't feel bad about it because you agree with it. So that's probably not a true strength. But if you were like, your teacher was like really great in class, but talks too much, and that kind of hurt, those hurtful feedbacks, it hurts because that's actually an area that you found joy, that you're good at. And then you got feedback that was somehow wrong.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Because it didn't fit. So that's a catalyst to know when you get feedback on something that, like, you were enjoying that conversation. I've been told that I monologue or, you go on and on. Well, as a public speaker, that you get paid to do that. And at a coffee chat, that doesn't feel like reciprocal communication. And so when you got that feedback, it hurt. And it hurt because you were actually thought you were sharing a story. You were in the moment. You were happy. So I like audience, you need to be attuned to that. When somebody gives you feedback that you were doing something wrong and it hurts, it's probably because it's not what you were doing was wrong, but it wasn't right for that situation. And it might actually be a catalyst of something that brings you joy. And then it's just finding where that strength is actually appreciated. So it's like, the watch at the pawn shop isn't worth anything, but then you take it to Sotheby's and it's worth millions of dollars. Like really finding out where your differences or strengths are actually appreciated. Because in the wrong environment, it is a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a great, like what you just said kind of reminds me of the deli story, because me talking a lot to the customers was a problem because I was slowing down production. But now, I'm a podcaster, I'm on social media, I have a newsletter, like all I do is talk, right? And I'm making a living talking and everyone asks me to talk, not everyone, but people ask me to talk now. So yeah, there's a big difference between those two career choices that I've made. So, yeah, I would pay attention to those things. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's not like I found the career and now I just talk for a living and it's great. Like I do struggle with ADHD things every single day. It does not matter if I have had medication that day. It doesn't matter if I've slept perfectly and had water and all of that, which that never happens. But I still have struggles every day because of ADHD, whether it's, it's all of it. Just because I found a job that works for me, I have a little bit less stress than some other jobs, but it's still a lot to deal with having ADHD. I'm not healed.
Not healed, but we have slowed down the negative feedback loop.
Oh, yeah. I am so much nicer to myself. I think that really came from my lady ADHD and seeing women speak horribly about themselves over and over again, and me saying it and trying and being kind of put in a role model situation where I really didn't want that narrative. I didn't want to just be always complaining or always negative, I guess, there. I wanted to be like a bright light, like a humorous look at ADHD, like a playful look at the struggles that we were dealing with, instead of like sad, because it's hard enough. Like, I don't want to be sad all the time. And I don't think people with ADHD want to be sad all the time. We're playful about it. We want to learn how our brains work without being overwhelmed by it. And so just like bite-sized content, bite-sized learning about it is, I think, the way to go sometimes.
I like that. Small little things. So we know that a lot of people either they know a little bit about ADHD. They know from what they read. It could be attention issues. It could be executive functioning, time management. It could be procrastination. It could be anxiety based on social cues. I mean, it shows up in so many different ways and so many different people. So, we have women listening that they either suspect they have ADHD or they're struggling. Like, how do you give them some advice on just getting to the path of some self-acceptance, whether or not they get a diagnosis or not?
Yeah, the thing that helped me was finding community. This is where I usually suggest most people start, is to just reach out, like do a quick little search. If you want to be social media, if you don't, if you want, there's magazines, there's blogs. Just reading and being involved in the community is really, really helpful place to start, to recognize your struggles in somebody else and to like put a name to the face of what you're dealing with. And I think that's usually what I tell people. I have a couple of books that I like to recommend that are very kind of easy to read. I don't know if you've read Extra Focus by Jesse Anderson. It's a quick start guide to ADHD. He wrote it after he got diagnosed as an adult, and it's the book that he wanted to write for himself. So it's one of the books I recommend a lot. But yeah, I think it's just finding community and like surrounding yourself with other people who have ADHD so that you can like let go of some of the shame. You can start to unmask if that's something that you're pushed towards, but just maybe putting yourself in rooms with other ADHDers when possible it's been amazing for me to do that. So that's what I do usually recommend.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because maybe in your home or your community or workplace, you feel like you're an anomaly or different. But Trina's right. You dip your toe, you would be surprised at how many people have comparable.
Hundreds of thousands, apparently.
Hundreds of thousands. So here,
I thought that I was the only one, but I'm telling you right now, there's lots of women with ADHD. There's a lot more women out there talking about ADHD than a couple years ago, which I love. And there's different women with different backgrounds and different cultures, and all over the world, women are sharing their experiences, and it shows up differently in different countries. It's accepted differently. It's talked about differently, and all over the world, it varies greatly. And so if you don't see yourself in someone like me, white 30-something female, there's so many other faces out there that you can like resonate with, which I think is really nice right now. So there's so many women talking about ADHD and their struggles now, which is just so great. So it makes me very happy.
I love it. One of the things sometimes we're talking, and it does seem like a lot of us that talk about these topics to the outsiders are like, yeah, well, you went all in on talking about it, but I'm not going to be the public speaker or the writer or the teacher or whatever. I just want to like get through a day and have a job. So they're like still kind of like hitting their head against what I call the social brick wall. What are some strategies to give them? Because they're still like their day to day will still be most likely navigating a majority of people that don't get it.
Oh man, so tough. So the first thing I thought of, right, my gut was to possibly look into coaching. I don't want to, push anyone towards that, but if it's an option for you, I have after I started MyADHDLady ADHD, I got involved with an ADHD coaching company called Shimmer. And I love what they're doing for the community. I love the people that are running it. And so I got involved and I got myself an ADHD coach. And I've had coaching now for most of 2024. And I love having a coach to help me navigate things like this. So let's say I was at work and I was really struggling with like, oh, I think I should have a conversation with my boss. What does this look like? What should I ask for? Like my coach would help me through that, right? Like my coach would help me navigate how to have this conversation, what your legal rights are. Like a lot of them know these things. So that's been super helpful for me just to have a coach. And I know that's not an option for everyone. I also would probably listen to some podcasts out there about ADHD and just familiarize yourself with some of the laws around ADHD at work and, places all over the world. There's places where you can get free ADHD coaching through your company. I don't think in the US right now, but hopefully that comes this way. But yeah, there's options out there for you. I think it's helpful to have like someone there to help you through some of this, someone that maybe has been through before. So if you can't afford that or can't, find that, there's so many resources online nowadays for ADHD, which is just so great. There's books, podcasts, and everything you could want. But yeah, I really, truly feel for those people that are just struggling at work and just trying to survive another day in the office. I have 100% been there 30 something times. And it's pretty rough, and I think if you're in one of those really desperate, sad spots at work and you don't know what to do next, I think, for me, again, journaling, writing it down, like letting it out, brain dumping, and then just all your strengths need to be laid out on the table. And you need to really look at that and maybe take a peek at your weaknesses and see where you're struggling and acknowledge where you're struggling and, maybe come up with a plan. And if you can't come up with a plan, then maybe you do need help, like a coach or a mentor or another person to guide you through this. You shouldn't have to be miserable at work all the time. Like that doesn't feel right to me. Like it's not good for you. It's not always possible to leave a situation like that. So I do always want to preface that, but I just want more people happy at work. It's tough.
Agreed.
Well, those things are heavy. If you're struggling at work, it is so heavy. And you are not just leaving that at work. You're taking that home. And it's not good.
No. And it creates a negative narrative. So we often talk about what the individual can do, but you and I know that it's not just the individual. We have family members that are impacting our perception of self, employers and managers. What should they be doing to help play a role in creating a better environment?
The people with ADHD or the families.
No,
oh
everybody
Lord.
else.
Okay. This one, it's so tough. I personally have struggles in this area. I have family that's super supportive and loving and helpful. And then I have some family that is super not. So I'm kind of down the middle with it. It's really tough, for the people that don't get it, or if you're getting some of the stigma, some of the little snarky comments from family members about ADHD. I would just continue to maybe push some small resources towards them, like a book or podcast episode they can listen to, or send them a reel of something that resonates and something that you're struggling with. If you don't feel like you can have that conversation, just sending them, a little bit about what your struggles are, and maybe they'll start to get it. It's super tough. This is probably another thing I would work with my coach on personally, is to just try to navigate the family dynamics. And this is something that I'm working with my coach on, because I am split right down the middle. Yeah, it's tough, so it's just a lot, isn't it? I feel stressed just thinking about it. My whole body's hurting.
It is a lot.
It's so tough.
Got to breathe through it. Yeah. One of the things that, it's probably easier. It's weird because I think people would talk about ADHD struggles at work more than they would talk about ADHD struggles with their family. And I don't want to say this as a generalized truth, but you're probably going to get a little more empathy at work, possibly because it's required by law, than you will at home. Not necessarily your immediate family, but others, because, there are people, I don't like to call ADHD a mental illness, but mental health has had a horrible stigma aligned to illness my entire life. I feel like we've made some great strides in the last 5 or 10 years. It's getting better, but you don't undo decades of socialization and stigma, and then just one day everybody accepts it as like a way of being, which is what we're pushing in neurodiversity. But I think it's really interesting that, like, with families, somebody, like, people say, do you tell your family if you were diagnosed? And I'm going to share this with you, might help you. One of the strategies I recommend is not like, if you don't think people are going to be accepting of your diagnosis, and or you're afraid of the stigma that they might apply to you, instead of saying, I have ADHD, well, first of all, most people don't even know what ADHD is, right? And that goes back to the beginning of all the things that people conceive. But quickly, because I'm going to ramble, so we don't want to do that. But when we look at ADHD, what I like to tell folks, especially at work, if you're afraid to disclose, is just say, hey, boss, I'm working on X project. It would be really helpful to me if I could get the agenda before the meeting, and if we could have somebody take notes so that we're all on the same page. I just was able to get support to help task management and executive functioning without actually saying I had a problem. It sounds like I'm trying to be organized and asking them to be accountable for that organization. Not saying it worked, but most people don't think that way. They're like, I have to present a problem in order for someone to help me. So then you think of like your great Aunt Ida, who's like a nitpick about the menu and stuff. And they're always on you about like the schedule and the time. And you may be like compelled to say, great Aunt Ida, I have a hard time organizing all this stuff because of XYZ. I have ADHD. And she'll be like, oh, they made that up in the 1980s. It's not real. Where rather you could be like, great Aunt Ida, since you have all these great ideas on how to organize the event, do you want to organize everything? And you just tell me what I need to do, and I'll be happy to do it. And then she feels empowered and gets to boss you around, and you get the task organization and just let go of the responsibility of having to organize all of it. So those are some secrets, guys, of like, if you don't feel
write those down.
If you don't feel people will be receptive to helping you, or worse, you're part of, people that are like, everybody's got ADHD now and you're using it as a crutch. Most people, I didn't say all, but most people, if you're like, hey, I'm really busy this Friday, would you mind calling those 3 people and making sure that they can come? That would really help me out. You didn't have to say that. It's like, I am so scatterbrained right now because I'm overwhelmed and unorganized. Can you do, like, frame it as a, hey, let's split some duties, or hey, boss, can we have agendas before meetings? Because I don't like surprises.
I love all of this. I 100% agree. I think this is always the best approach. And I think that is part of the problem, is the approach.
Yeah.
A lot of times, people love to help. People are helpers. People want to help. So giving them an opportunity to help that's a great place to start.
They can
great place to start.
They can be the hero.
Great. And they would be. I mean, they would be a hero to me, someone to take notes in the meetings and having all of that. Like, oh, what a dream. Yeah, I think it is about the approach. And I say the same thing. I make a joke that I started my Instagram page and I told 130,000 people that I had ADHD before I told my boss. So my boss at the time had no idea that I had ADHD. Behind the scenes, I built an audience to about 130,000 people on social media. And to be honest, I should have shared with them because I was in a marketing role where they really could have used somebody who could grow an Instagram account to 130,000, right? So
Yeah.
I kept that strength away from my boss because I was afraid of the reaction. So I've been in a position where I didn't feel comfortable talking about ADHD at work, and I felt more comfortable telling 130,000 strangers than telling my boss. So that right there should show you how bad the stigma really is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still an issue. This was just a couple of years ago. They do know now. It actually turned out that her son had ADHD and we bonded over this experience, but that is very lucky that I got, that kind of reaction. But yeah, I think it is about the approach. I'll back it up to say that going into it with a different mindset when you're asking for help or accommodations, I think it's totally normal for humans to ask for help.
Yes. And talking about humans and help, we have this hour has flown. So definitely would love to continue this conversation. But is there anything, talking about asking for help, are there any resources or anything else you want to share with the audience that it's like, you got this? What can we do to help them?
Oh my goodness, to help women with ADHD who are struggling. Oh, I just feel for you. Yeah, just dive down the rabbit hole. Go ahead, dive down the rabbit hole, learn everything you can about ADHD. You don't have to start an Instagram page or a podcast or a newsletter. That might seem overwhelming, but learn about your brain, learn how it works, and it will help you make sense of why you're struggling. And then you can get to the point where you can add in tools and supports to help you navigate everything. If you really want to tap into your strengths and learn so much about your strengths, I would recommend the VIA strengths test. If you've probably taken it before, take it again. This is your reminder to take your strengths test again and do it every few years, and learn everything you can about ADHD and yourself. And when you have those two together, you're starting off much better. If you learn more about yourself and more about ADHD, then you should be good. You should be good.
I think it's a great start. I can't thank you enough for your time today, Trina. I think it's really helpful for women to hear, and men, the struggles that women are facing, and that it doesn't have to be a barrier to success and happiness.
No, but for some it is. For some it is really, really hard. And I've been in a really depressive place with undiagnosed ADHD, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes for women with ADHD. The more you can meet someone with ADHD, the more you can meet them with kindness and empathy, the better. That's all I can say.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Oh, let's please do it again. I told you I don't shut up about ADHD. I'm happy to come back on.
Would love it. Would love to have you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank Audio Works Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.